Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's that time of the year when we have got to go through the ritual of the budget. I think clearly what we have seen over the years is to a large extent, it's kind of fiddling with it. Certainly on the taxes issues, things come up, and a few groanings here, there, a few crying. But I don't know whether fundamentally the budget actually achieves what it's meant to do. Because I think when we review the year after, the supplementary budget tends to come out sometimes bigger than the original budget. And now we are still grappling with what is the size of the budget, what is the size of the economy. So I'm personally not very sure, even because I think there was a headline in one of the papers that the economy is now 66 billion, which means we have already hit the upper middle income economy before we have even hit 2030. So really, I think the budget is out of my depth, and all protocols observed. That's why we called in a number of experts to put some sanity into us. And I would like to call upon Professor Mugano to come through. Honorable Tendai, Biti, a round of applause. Economist Persistence Gwanyanya, who is also on the Monetary Policy Committee, and the inimitable Brains Muchemwa, one of the most candid economists in the country, to come and help us put some sanity into this budget. If I can maybe ask the people in the room to come and move this. I think I would also want to actually take a seat, because I think when you talk matters of the budget and where we are going, it might be quite difficult if you keep standing up, because so I think what I will do is I'll ask each one of the panelists to give us their initial reaction and comments in 5-6 minutes on the budget. What's it the most? Are they happy? Are they worries that they have? And I will hit it from my right, coming to this way. Brains, over to you. Where are you with this budget?
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very difficult question in terms of where I am. In fact, when I woke up in the morning, I got a message from Sabu Kwango Kumusha. I just saw a call back. I didn't understand, had he seen the budget? Is he expecting me to come back, Kumusha, or what? I am yet to call him. But I think it says a lot about probably my time in a hurry. It could be up. Thank you very much. The budget, I think the minister has presented the budget in a very difficult environment. In particular, I'm looking from the perspective of the currency. You have alluded to it already, 58 trillion. What exchange rate exactly was used in coming up with the 58? I thought maybe there would be assumptions on the budget to say the budget has been presented using an exchange rate of some number, so that at least we can get an idea. Why am I interested in the exchange rate? Is because 80% of the money supply in this country is now US dollars. The minister even said that 60% of the budget expenditures are US dollar linked. So essentially we are in a US dollar economy. And when you present a budget in a US dollar economy and you present it in a Zim dollar currency, it sometimes creates challenges, especially in terms of analyzing the budget and understanding its impact on the economy, on growth, on inflation, and exchange rate as well. As you can see, I think someone alluded to it already, that we are seeing massive movements in the Zimbabwe dollar values of the budget. 58 trillion. By June, it will probably be 130 trillion. By December, probably 200 trillion, thereabout. So at the end of the day, from an analysis perspective, it becomes very difficult to understand. So I thought the minister was going to present the budget in US dollars, because the US dollar is this significant, it's the currency that we're using. But of course, we've used the Zim dollar. So when you use the Zim dollar, I thought as well that surely we can't use the Zim dollar to present the budget and then be quiet about the use of the Zim dollar. The government seems to like the US dollar, I think, more than the Americans themselves. I thought surely this was a moment where, when I saw it in US Zim dollars, I thought surely this is the moment where the minister was going to announce that going forward, all taxes are going to be paid in Zimbabwe dollars. The Zim dollar, as you know, has been an orphan for many years. It's a currency that is just issued and no one wants to protect it. No one is interested in it, including as well the issuer of the currency, which is the government. So I'm quite disappointed that nothing was said about the payment of taxes in Zim dollars. In fact, the minister said it, but he didn't want to commit anything about it. He said, in due course, you know, it's an afterthought that probably the Zim dollar is something that we'll use. So I'm quite unhappy with the stance of the government on the Zimbabwe dollar. I love the Zim dollar, and I would have wanted the government to continue using the Zimbabwe dollar. On the tax initiatives, I think most of the tax initiatives by the government, they are very progressive. People need to learn to pay their fair share of taxes. You can't live in a society where others pay tax and others don't pay tax. But I guess at the end of the day, what was lacking now in the budget, for example, the minister says we're going to tax 1% on properties that are worth more than 100,000. You would expect that probably some analysis would have already been done to say, we expect you to raise this much, and we are going to use this much towards this, whatever, you see. So there are just some of the figures that we see being thrown around, even some of the increases in toll gates, etc. Yes, the money will go into the Consolidated Revenue Fund. That's not a problem. But again, you expect that at least we need numbers. You see, budget is about numbers and impact. How much are we expecting to raise additional, right? What is the expected impact? So that when we look at it, you know, in hindsight, we're able to say, well done, Minister, or well done, the government, you have done very well in terms of this tax head. And so some of the issues that are there, to me, they are very progressive. When you look at the domestic top-up tax, it's amazing. How much exactly are we expecting? I like as well the fact that we should not actually be giving tax incentives to foreigners. I don't like this idea that my brother here will want to set up a tax shop, who will really start chasing him on taxes and all that. Then a guy comes in a suit and we give him a chair and we give him a tax holiday for 5 years. This is the same guy who has remained in Zimbabwe, whose assets were demolished by inflation, right? But we still want him to pay taxes. And then there's another guy who has lived in an economy where there is no inflation. They've been able to keep their capital and everything for many years. And then they come to Zimbabwe and give them tax incentives. So I'm liking the idea that we should be moving away from giving tax incentives to, especially the lithium sector. There is no reason whatsoever why the lithium sector should be accorded tax holidays. I know I'm almost 5 minutes, but yeah, I will allow others to come in.
Okay, thanks very much, Brains. A big round of applause for that intervention. I've always wondered whether it's really, I hear you in terms of your love for the Zim dollar. I've always wondered whether it's really the decision of government or it's of the market. And I'm not aware of a company or a country that dollarized and came back. And I remember even in 2009, when we dollarized, in the combis, people were literally throwing away the Zim dollar. So I'm not too sure who should lead what, but we'll come back to that.
I could answer that quickly. It's the government that is leading look, they want to go and look at the safe deposit box. Do you think they're looking for Zim dollars there? They love the US dollars more than, so they actually, it's the government that loves the Zim US dollar more than the market. So the government has to lead by example. They issue the Zim dollar. If you are the issuer of the currency, you should be able to protect it. But if you can't show trust in the currency that you are issuing yourself, I don't think anyone would really have the courage to believe in that currency when the issuer himself is not comfortable.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's all right. Honorable Biti, your interventions, your comments, you must be clearly excited about this budget.
Regrettably, I consider that this budget is one of the worst budgets that I've ever seen. the budget lacks credibility. It lacks relevance. It lacks legitimacy. It lacks legality. It lacks credibility once you express the same in Zimbabwean dollars when the economy is 95% dollarized. It lacks credibility when you are collecting every tax in US dollars, but you continue pretending with the myth that we have de-dollarized. So there's absolutely no credibility there. It's not technically sound. As a document, it's not technically sound. So if you look at the revenue at the revenues, the original budget had an expenditure of about $4.2 trillion. The revenue was about $3.9 trillion. The same budget will now tell you that to September 2023, we've collected something like $11.4 trillion. And the projected deficit is about $9 trillion to the end of the year. But we know that this is not credible. We know that this is not credible for two reasons. Number one, it's clear that the figures are understating the true expenditure in 2023. And remember, 2023 had an election that cost us US $188 million. Now, I don't know what exchange rate you are going to use to dollarize 188 million US dollars. But once you factor it into those figures, it means that we have overshot the original expenditure by thousands and thousands of percentages. So two things should have happened. Number one, we acknowledge that the revenues increased, the expenditure increased because of the currency collapse of 900% in May and June of 2023. So what it meant is that the minister was supposed to come up with a supplementary budget to absorb and seek leave from the house to expend the extra income that arose out of inflation, that arose out of hyperinflation, that arose out of the collapse of the currency in May and June of 2023, when our currency collapsed by a factor of 900%. So you need a supplementary budget. But what has been happening now, and I'm sure the Auditor General will pick this up 2 years from now, is that they will have spent money outside Parliament and they will come to Parliament with a condonation bill, as they've done in the past 4 years, where we have had two condonation bills, one for 11.6 billion US dollars and another one for 103 Zimbabwean billion dollars. So that much is coming. The irrelevance of this budget comes from the fact that it fails to address the fundamentals that are affecting this economy. What are the fundamentals that are affecting this economy? The first one is clearly and naturally the exchange rate mismanagement. The fact that there's a premium between the black market and what happens at the Reserve Bank every Tuesday. The nominal ritualism that reproduces itself at the Reserve Bank every Tuesday. If you look at the Tuesday result, the Zimbabwean dollar to the US is trading at around 5,000. $1 to about 5,500. But if you go to 4th Street now, the US dollar is now close to $10,000. Yesterday it was $9,800. So as long as you fail to address this fundamental problem in the economy, the budget is irrelevant, because the budget is a macroeconomic tool to address macroeconomic disequilibrium in the economy. And consequently, if you fail to address the exchange rate, you have failed to address the main driver of inflation and hyperinflation in the country, which is, of course, the exchange rate. So the budget fails dismally to do that. The second thing that is a problem which the budget fails to address is inflation, of course, which is a byproduct of of the exchange rate, but it's also a byproduct of the government failing to live within its means. It's a product of the budget failing to recognize what I used to say, we eat what we kill. And if you look at the figures disclosed in the budget of the movement of broad money, they disclosed that in June alone, broad money and reserve money was 3,000% increase, 1,500% increase in 1 month. 3,500%, ladies and gentlemen, is a huge increase. In the old communist Europe, they used to shoot a reserve bank governor capable of this shocking increase in broad money, M3, or reserve money. So the government has got the taps open. We know, for instance, the huge amounts of money that are being incurred in our infrastructure. People are being paid money inconsistent with international standards. So the budget is irrelevant in that it fails to address the fundamental problems. But the most disturbing thing for me in this budget is its narcissism. We are overtaxed, my brother. We are overtaxed. An average small low-income country like Zimbabwe is only able to fund its budget by 16%. The rest comes from donors, the international community, overseas development assistance. We are funding this budget to the tune of 35%. 35%. So we are taxed. We are one of the countries in the world with a higher ratio of revenue to GDP, which is a reflection of how we are overtaxed. Notwithstanding that we are already overtaxed, this budget then comes up with an array of new tax increase. There's an increase in toll fees. There's an increase in vehicle registration fees. There's an increase on sodas. So to drink soda today is going to cost you more. There's an increase in what they're calling a strategic levy, which is in fact an increase in fuel, in petrol, and diesel. They've created a new tax called the wealth tax, which is 1% of the value of any immovable property of any house that is above 1%. So that is above $100,000. But that is ridiculous. It's ridiculous because number one, when you own a house, you would already have paid capital gains tax. When you own a house, you pay tax annually. It's called a rate. So we pay rates already. Rates are tax. When you own a house, you already have paid another tax, which we know lawyers know a lot about. It's called stamp duty. You pay stamp duty on that. When you die and your children have to inherit that house, they pay another tax, death duty, stamp duty. So property is already overtaxed. Immovable property is already overtaxed. But this tax is oblivious to who owns these properties. Many children own immovable property as a result of inheritance. If you go to Greendale, Mantara, Athlone, the majority of people who own those land are pensioners who are getting 60,000 RTGS from NASA. I heard when I came in, one of the speakers say, well, it's meant to address the extraction and the ill-begotten rents that we see in the form of mushrooming mansions in Shawasha Hills and so forth. There are better ways of catching those people that are not paying tax. But a 1% tax across the board is unprogressive. Any tax like VAT that equalizes everyone is unprogressive because it assumes that a poor, like my mother is a widow. She owns a house at 31 Kennedy Drive. In the same street, there is one of these emerging miners. The two are not the same. The two are not the same. So a tax that equalizes everyone is not progressive. I'm talking tax law, and it should be discouraged. So you have got this regime of unpalatable revenue measures that have been given, that have been imposed, which are not sustainable. Then you have got these extra fascist powers that have been given to the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority. They now have the power of temporarily shutting down businesses. They now have the power of going to cash boxes and cabs and inspecting what is in there without a court order, without due process. They now have powers of going on your data and capturing your data despite the provisions of the Cybersecurity Act. Have we turned into a fascist republic? Are we this desperate for revenue that we create this flagrant abuse of human rights? So in short, this budget doesn't have credibility, is irrelevant, is narcissistic. In fact, when you read it, you actually say to yourselves, did these people actually win an election? Did these people actually love Zimbabweans? Because I would like to submit respectively that a person who loves Zimbabweans and who genuinely won an election would not punish Zimbabweans in the form of the vulgar sobriquet that was presented yesterday.
Thank you, Honorable Biti. Professor Mugano, you have been quite vocal about general economics. What your views on the current budget? Are you finally a fan of what's happening?
There's no budget to talk about. We have just seen a weapon of mass destruction presented by the Minister of Finance to push us back into poverty. I want to build on what my brother, Honorable Biti, said here. I was asking myself the same question to say, who is going to be the victim of the target fees, the one who is going to be hit more by the target fees? And when you look at the population, it's the rural folks, because we'll be traveling to the rural areas, and the bus fares are going to increase in a big way. I just saw that the target fees for the buses have gone up by 200%. And that would mean to say the bus fare will go up. The pensioners who will be coming to town to collect their pensions, again, they're going to, I think they have to come 6 months down the line, because they cannot come every month to collect the pension. So this is anti-people, anti-industry budget. It's not a normal budget. Some people would want to talk about a pro-poor, but I think pro-poor is understated. Anti-pro-poor is understatement. It's anti-people. I would want to really understand how a civil servant who is paid in Zim dollar is going to use those Zim dollars in the market. Because when you go into supermarkets, you can buy better when you are holding US dollars. When you go to tax shops, there's no Zim dollar. So you are holding a pay slip in Zimbabwean dollars, but the market is dollarized. So I'm just confirming and agreeing with my colleagues that presenting a budget in Zimbabwean dollar was a wrong thing to do. But I want to dig deeper from where Honorable Biti left, particularly looking at these specific taxes and say, what is the purpose of this tax? And did the Minister of Finance and his team pay extra attention to understand its possible implication? For example, the decision to stop traders from buying from manufacturers and only allowing traders with VAT certificates, I think it's very dangerous at two levels. One, we know that the current statistics shown by World Bank in fiscal studies, these traders, they make about $500 a month, and by any imagination, they cannot hit any annual sales of $25,000 for them to get a VAT certificate. Now, which means they are not able to be eligible to buy from manufacturer. Now, I want you to look at the bread industry. Supermarkets, by nature, they won't push any volumes of bread. The real drivers of volume of the bread industries are the vendors and the tax shops. So, before we even go and look at the impact of this policy measure on the people, we have to look at the impact on the industry. To say, how is the bread industry? And I can see my sister from Dairy Board. How are your vendors going to push sales of ice cream? Are you going to push your ice cream in OK or Pick and Pay? Hallelujah. So what is going to happen to your sales? So what it means is clearly you're also killing businesses. Because if they can't push sales to these informal traders,
and you must sell to licensed, those who have got VAT, and you want to sell newspapers, are you going to push your newspapers in the supermarkets? So those are real questions the Minister of Finance must be alive to. So what is the implication? You cut back on production because you can't move volumes. Jobs are going to be lost. He's going to lose taxes again. That's at the industry level. Now at a people's level now, we have over 6 million people who are in the informal sector, pushed by 85% informal unemployment. Formal unemployment. I want to qualify formal unemployment because people are informally employing themselves. So these people are hiding in the informal sector, 6 million people. And you are saying if you don't have a VAT certificate, you can't. So that's why I'm saying it's anti-people. And I don't know whether the Minister of Finance understands this national security that can come from those people who are now jobless and their only option is to go in the streets. So there are also risks of unrest. When you look at economic issues, there are also civil unrest, which is a possibility. So to me, that's a real concern. It's a serious one. And when you look at this levy on sugar content beverages, 2 cents per gram of sugar in a drink. You know, sugar drinks are for the poor. Those are our drinks, right? Anything which is sugar is for the poor. That's where we make our life. And even for our kids, when they go to boarding school, they are going to be taking sugar. That's why they are very hype and very active. They are eating sugar. Now he's coming to us again and hit us with that useless tax to raise money for cancer machines, which is a good thing. But why don't we stop these useless by-elections and set that money for the cancer machine? So Zimbabweans were not stupid, you know. Government has to be very sincere, because you can't say on one end you spend $188 million on elections, disputed elections. Then now we have just done that election. Then you will see creation of new by-elections created by the same regime. No one is a fool to see that this is the regime creating it. And we are spending $5 million on this by-election. There are other sets of by-elections coming. And you come to us again, the citizens who is being forced to go in the by-election and say, we are coming to your sugar drinks. Look, give us a break. That's not fair. Is it a crime that we were born in Zimbabwe? So this is unfair when you look at it practically, and when you look at corruption, Honorable Biti was talking about the Auditor General report, the amount of money which we waste on corruption, close to $1 billion every year, and 1.8 billion extra on illicit financial flows, which was confirmed by the gold mafia. 1.2 billion gold, $600 million other minerals. So we spend almost $3 billion on corruption, right? So we can argue about that, but let's come back to the auction system, which is a command auction. We get 12 billion, we got $12 billion last year, and we could not account for it. Yet Kenya got 5 billion, and Kenya has got 45 million people, but they don't struggle with foreign currency. We got 12 billion, and my brother is here, he's in the Central Bank Monetary Policy Committee. They oversee a command exchange rate, which is manipulated, which creates avenues for arbitrage and waste money. So if we had an efficient exchange rate system with one price, we would close all these loopholes and save money and put for the cancer machine. So my point, moderator, is that we have not done homework as a country to say what are possible avenues which we can use to save money and address national requirement. The one which Honorable Biti was talking about, the strategic reserve levy of 2 cents extra. It will tell you very simple arithmetic that your price of fuel is going to go up by 2 cents. And you are going to be facing it as a transporter, as a commuter, right? And also in the business. So all this whole package of taxes is inflationary. It's inflationary. So where I sit, I put on my tweet that I think this is the time where ZANU-PF MPs and the Triple C MP must unite on this subject of the budget and reject it because it's useless. If ZANU-PF MPs go on their, this is my last point, on their course of being whipped at Sheikh House, and come back and support this useless budget, what they are supporting is very simple, and I want this to be taken by media. They are supporting that there are people who voted for them in the rural areas must suffer. Some people in the urban areas who are 60 million people who are in the informal sector must suffer. So this is the payment of ZANU-PF government if they support this budget to pass through Parliament. I rest my case.
Thank you very much. I think the issue of sugar is clearly quite an interesting one. And persistence, you sit in the Monetary Policy Committee, and you have heard the comments. But I get a view that you may have a vantage point, and there could be some issues you see which we may not be privy. What's your take on this budget? Are you happy with it? Are you?
Thank you. I always want to put things into perspective. Today, as a country, we are confronted by serious geopolitical headwinds. We are confronted by serious domestic issues relating to El Nino-induced drought. On the global scale, we are most affected by the slowdown in global commodity prices. Zimbabwe, by its nature as a country, its structure, it's a commodity-dependent economy, mineral-dependent economy, to be specific. Out of all the revenues we're talking about in respect of inflows that come to the country every year, 85% are contributed by minerals. But these exports in the past, like previous years, they've been contributing around 60% of the total inflows. They've gone down to around 50, thereabouts. The reason 50% thereabouts, 54% or so, the reason being that the revenue from the minerals is significantly reduced. So given this unhealthy makeup of our economy, it is unavoidable that the pressure is going to be felt. The reaction from the budget could be a reflection of the geopolitical situation, but also the drought-induced, the El Nino drought-induced situation. Now, to put that into context again, in the next 2 seasons, this region is expecting drought of historic proportion. And you would always want to look back at the hindsight to say, if drought was going to confront us at a time where our agriculture sector was that bad as in the previous 2 or 3 years and before, what would it have left us at? This gets me to think that some of the investments and priorities that happened at government could have been in good order. Look, for example, the agriculture. I was in Malawi recently, and they looked at me with envy, especially with respect to the progress we have made in agriculture, just through the programming and the participation of the private sector. But it's a good story to tell. It's a good story that is being talked at regional level. So I would want to think that that is a progress we have registered as an economy. Even the infrastructure itself. I know it didn't happen without cost. There's nothing for free in this world. There's always trade-off. But some of the issues that are being discussed here and the points that are being raised, they more reflect our circumstances than anything else, than the conduct of fiscal and monetary policies. If you can tell me, I can single out that we as a country are a burden of our past. We carry a burden of our past. We carry a burden of our circumstances, which are unique. It is ill-advised to look at Zimbabwe like in a general way as you analyze this economy, because our experiences are different. Our path is different. They always talk about path dependence. Where we're coming from is quite different. So if you ask me, the biggest challenge that confronts us as a country is nothing to do with policy. It's nothing to do with macroeconomic policy. It has to do with confidence. Confidence, in my view, is outside economics and finance. You have been talking about issues that do not relate to economics and finance. That is where the answer lies. As you asked me, if you ask me about the macroeconomic issues, I would tell you that we have done all the basics that are required for this country to stabilize. I talk about stabilizing because stability seems to be the key issue today. So what do you need for a country to stabilize? You need to balance the budget. I know it is quite debatable that the balance is budget we claim the balance is the budget is balanced, but we continue to overspend. I don't want to use the word overspend as a country, to spend more than the budget. But this is all to do with the exchange rate. And the exchange rate has got nothing to do with the monetary expansion. Or the monetary phenomena is quite different, Prof and Honorable Biti. It's quite different from the traditional monetary phenomena, which is driven by seigniorage or dipping into the bottomless pocket of the central bank. The monetary phenomena reflects in the rejection of your own local currency. So the rejection of your own local currency is equivalent to the printing or the expansion of money supply. The monetary phenomena relates to the increase in dollarization. So the increase in dollarization presents a situation of increased money supply, something like increased money supply. But it is not the actual challenge we face as an economy. So the actual challenge relates to the confidence. That is our key challenge that we face as an economy. But as we discuss the shortfalls of policy today, it will be more beneficial from where I sit that you proffer alternatives to a situation, a unique situation that confronts us as a country today.
Thank you very much. I think you can pass that down. A big round of applause. So in terms of your intervention persistence, it's a lot of this is something to do with headwinds that are in the global and other bigger issues before us. But just to press the point, why can't we use a currency we can easily follow just to do the budget? But from an accounting perspective, you want to be able to, the whole point of a budget is so that you can say, I want to spend so much, and you can come back tomorrow and measure whether you spend as much as you projected. That has nothing to do with the global thing. Why can't we do the basics in terms of just agreeing what the size of the economy is? What does the global headwinds have to do with us not being sure whether we're 22 billion, 66 billion, or whatever it is? Why can't we, given that there's this confusion out there, why can't we look each other in the eye and just do the basics and the right thing? And my last point, then you can intervene maybe, it's already been raised. Why can't we allow the market to determine the exchange rate? Why are we creating these arbitrages? What has that got to do with the global economy? It's us who sit every Tuesday and deal with this exchange. Why can't we do the basics? Granted, the world is not in our favor, but why can't we do the right thing ourselves? Maybe you can come in.
Thank you. You might want to learn that the ultimate objective of the country is to effectively de-dollarize. Now, We now know better from 2009 that when you remove or you create an impression that you have removed your currency from the eyes of the public, it will be very difficult to claw back. I spoke about the path dependence. The mistake we made in 2009 still haunts us as a country. That's why I emphasized we carry a burden of the past. We made a mistake of de-dollarizing the minds of the people. Of dollarizing the minds of the people. And we find it now very difficult today to de-dollarize the minds of the people. In Germany today, the preponderance to hold cash is still very high. Why? Because they went through these current challenges. By their very nature, financial challenges are the worst. It is very difficult. I can take you to the global financial crisis. It is very difficult to come out of financial crisis. Crises of financial nature are very difficult to dig yourself out. That's why, despite all its challenges, the government has taken a decision to make sure that the Zimbabwean dollar remains on site. The Zimbabwean dollar remains available. You would have asked me why cash is being limited, which is a question that I think needs to be discussed, because I'm not for a situation, creating a situation where the Zimbabwean dollar is taken out of sight. The question you asked me about manipulating the exchange rate, it appears to everyone as if the exchange rate is manipulated. That's the impression you get. But from where I sit, it's the structure of the economy that makes it as if the exchange rate is manipulated. There are bankers here, they know how the exchange rate is determined. And they can tell you, they can attest to what I'm saying, that there is no manipulation of the exchange rate. But the structure we inherited from even the Smith regime of a concentrated economy that is unable to deliver a functional exchange rate market is what continues to hound us today. And that continues to present itself as if the exchange rate is manipulated.
All right. Thanks very much. I think we still have Lawrence in the house. You can confirm these mechanics on the exchange rate? Because he did say we have bankers, and true, we do have genuine qualified bankers. We would like him to certify the credibility of from where he stands. His comments as a player.
Talk about being thrown under the bus. So what I
you onto the bus.
So what I can confirm is the process that happens. Around June, we came up with a wholesale auction system. Because previously, all players had to go to Reserve Bank to bid in their own capacity. That was not very efficient. So what we started in June was a system where each bank goes with a bid to buy on behalf of its customers and then retails to its customers. When that system started, we saw the exchange rate going as high as 7,000. At those levels, we did not have demand in our banks. So what did we do? We started reducing the price that we were bidding at. So the 6,000 that we are currently bidding at would be a result of us consulting with our customers who want the currency. Admitted there would be other prices elsewhere, and the question has always been, so my summary right now is to say, if we are saying willing buyer, willing seller, probably there is lack of enough willing sellers, admitted, but the willing buyers are the ones who are telling us that at 10,000, we cannot come to your bank and buy. So I then have to make a call to say, at what rate should I bid for $10 million that I have to sell to somebody who wants to buy it? It's not a perfect system, but I probably think it talks to what persistence he has talked about and indicated, to say we don't have a perfect system.
Thank you very much. I think outside I would just need to learn how the bulk of the market escapes buying currency at 6 and is quite happy to go out there and procure it at 10. But that's some. Before I come back for a second round, are they burning? I just want to involve the audience in terms of any comments, reactions, very brief, not presentations, please, to our panelists. Any questions or very short comments?
Morning. I just want to come in and say, to correct persistence, where he seemed to suggest that in 2009, he says we made a decision. I want to say the market made a decision. You followed the market. So don't create the impression that you lead. The market leads.
Okay, thanks very much. Any other intervention, comment, question? Okay, there's a lady right there.
Okay, thank you. For me, was one of the panelists was talking about the issue that came through of the SMEs being taxed. I think it's something that has been in our market and which was also affecting business-wise, and this has been talked about. But from some of the contributions that came through was to say it will also affect business. I think my question in this regard is to say, if you put an initiative or a policy that is meant to assist another one or to help, obviously it is because its implications on the other. There was a talk around trade-off. So my question is to say, what else could have been done? Because the SME issue has always been there and affecting business now, mostly for retailers, because the economy is informalizing. So that was my question around there. What could have been done better? Because for me, I'm not saying it's 100% correct, but I understand that the comment was on disagreeing with it's a trade-off. But what else can be done to help that situation? Because from my end, the initiatives speaks to something that we've been waiting for in the industry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think I'll open up to our panelists to comment and respond. But more importantly also, I think persistence does raise a question in terms of it's one thing to criticize, but what would we actually want done? I think as we respond, I would like each and every one of the panelists to come round and tell us, respond to what's happening, but also come up with one or two definite actions that if you were to speak to Parliament, what would you want done? And I see, Professor Mugano, you have got the mic and you seem very...
Okay. Thank you very much. Before I reply my sister there, I just want to submit to Percy as a way of advice, since he sits in government, but also to give him more enlightenment about what could have been done. So you're talking about external shocks of drought. The easiest way of dealing with an external shock of a drought is to build strategic grain reserves. It's not to tax the poor people. The government of Zimbabwe, you are saying you were envied in Malawi, so where is the grain? If you were envied in Malawi, that you are doing a good stuff in Zimbabwe. So we should have a buffer stock of strategic grain reserve, which will take care of us during the drought. That is the thing. But I've noted that in February this year, the Grain Millers Association of Zimbabwe made a report that they are importing maize from Malawi, where you were being envied, at $450 million. And actually I had a debate with the PEMSEC then, the PEMSEC for Agriculture, Dr. Basera, on one local radio, when I was asking to say, you said we surplus last year, but this year, February, we are importing maize. So he said, we are not importing as government. It's the grain millers which is importing. But I said, Zimbabwe is importing. So the point I want to make is that we have not done well on agriculture in terms of our financing model and our structure. my point I want to make very clear, Mr. Moderator, is that in every year where we have a drought, we produce a bumper harvest of tobacco, including 1992. And I have seen in terms of ranking, we are number 4 in the world in tobacco in terms of exports globally. We have a reviewed comparative advantage of 189. You know, those who have done economics, they have learned about Palasa 1965 reviewed comparative advantage. Which country is competitive? And if it is above 1, you are competitive. We are not just above 1 in tobacco. We are 189, which means we are most competitive country in the world. That's why you see 98% of funding of tobacco is by investors, because they know we are competitive. So what is happening in tobacco, this is the advice now, is that it's an ecosystem of players who are your insurance companies, banks, merchants, investors. There's no government. The role of government is to regulate. So we should have the same approach to grains, soybean, wheat, maize, where government regulates, but they allow the commodity exchange to be the market. GMB stay back behind the scenes. GMB just buys maize for strategic grain reserves. I was talking to farmers. Some farmers have not yet been paid the maize for this year. Yeah? I was talking about this year, Chavaka deliver. And these farmers delivered this maize to create space for wheat farming. So they have not been paid on maize and on wheat. And now, even if there was no drought, we're still going to have the same effects of lack of higher output due to lack of financing. So you can see our systems are collapsing the whole system. There's nothing to do with the global economy here. It's our own inefficiencies when you look at what I'm telling you right now. The way to deal with the shocks of external nature when foreign currency is dwindling is to save on your foreign currency when you get a lump sum, right? And we were eating foreign currency like we were eating Maputi. So this is our problem. It has nothing to do with external issues. So I'm still praying for a day where Percy can recognize that this is not right. He suffers the pain of defending and defending. I don't know how he deals with these emotions, but I always pray for him. One day I want him to say, but this is not right. Because honestly, this budget is not a budget. You know, this is something which must be thrown away. And we started afresh. Now, my sister, what must be done? Taxing the informal sector, discouraging manufacturers to sell to the informal sector without a VAT license, right? What should be done? I thought business here, which are here, we can confirm with me. If I am coming to buy from a manufacturer, because what you truly want is tax, right? Even if I don't have a tax clearance, I'm still paying tax. Am I right? So what are we trying to do here? Because if I go and buy something from Dairy Board, they will charge me VAT. If I transfer money, they charge me 2%. So what is it which is not there? Because already we are doing it. So we are just creating a room of just fixing people's life. Because he still gets the money. In fact, it was actually very good. Because it was a way of formalizing the informal sector. When you create market linkages, I wrote 2 books on SMEs. And one way of formalizing the informal sector is the market linkages. So you link them with the manufacturers, they become traders. They need documentation for them to buy from what? From the formal sector. They need a bank account. Then you are now saying because you don't have a threshold, get out of that market. He is informalizing the informal sector. So he must just, the way forward, he must reverse that policy measure where he's saying they must get 25,000, get a VAT certificate. Because already the money is being collected by the manufacturer. So as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to put effort on. The system is already working. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Biti.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just to agree with the gentleman over there that when the government formally dollarized in 2009, it was not because there was any genius in government. The market had done that already. The people had done that already. I remember I remember driving with my wife in Nyamaropa in 2007 when things were so difficult. And those who know Nyamaropa know that there are lots of our farmers who sell potatoes by the road. So I wanted to buy a packet of potatoes. They said to me, 100 rands or $10. I said, but I've got bearer checks. I said, no, we want 100 rands or $10. So the dollarization that happened in this economy happened involuntarily in 2009. And what happens now in economics is that once you have a situation of involuntary dollarization, your currency would have been caught in flagranto. It would have been caught red-handed. There would be an absolute lack of confidence, total lack of confidence, total collapse in your currency. And in the history of mankind, there is no country, except Panama briefly, in 1904, there is no country in the world that is involuntarily dollarized, that has been able to dollarize again. So the government's quest to de-dollarize is a losing battle. That's why SI 33 of 2019 collapsed and failed in absolute terms. But the person who made it fail more than anyone else was the central bank and the government of Zimbabwe. Because despite the existence of SI 33 of 2019, every other levy, every other charge, including number plates, which we were buying for $80, every other levy charged by the government, including passport fees of $300, and fuel was being done by the government in US dollars. So the ultimate destroyer, apart from the confidence issue, the biggest destroyer of de-dollarization was the government itself. So it won't work. But I want to move very quickly to reforms. Number one, we have to deal with the confidence issue. And in my respectful opinion, confidence is a function of the electoral process. Confidence is a function of whether the citizen can freely elect those that it wants to lead to. The economy is a subject and function of the social contract. And the social contract is a function of the rule of law, of constitutionalism, of election delivery systems that actually deliver, not election delivery systems that are determined by the electorate and not the electorate. And that is the biggest problem in Zimbabwe. We need to fix our elections. We need to have fixed citizen authority and citizen control in this country. The rest are mechanics. Mechanics number one, we must dollarize again, fully. Number two, we must float the Zimbabwean dollar. We must scrap the auction system and let the market find a resting place for the Zimbabwean dollar. It has been done in this economy before. It has been done in Zimbabwe before. It was done in Rhodesia. At independence in 1980, the Zimbabwean dollar was equivalent to £1 British pound. And the US dollar was 60 cents to the Rhodesian dollar, determined by market forces. Number three is, very structurally, we must live within our means. In fact, in my submission, we must amend the Public Finance Management Act. We must amend Section 11 of the the Public Borrowing Act to ensure that the government lives within its means and that the government does not run a budget deficit that's more than 1% of GDP. Because what is killing us and what is one of the major drivers of inflation is broad demand supply. Something. And that is our problem. That is our problem. We need to control the budget deficit. And the budget deficit has brought us to where we are. And it's not so much the budget deficit, because every other country in the world, including the United States of America, has got a huge budget deficit. It is how we monetize this budget deficit which is a problem. Because we monetize it creatively and illegally. We print money, bearer checks, bond notes, RTGS dollars, etc., etc. We monetize it through corruption, massive deal. Just to give you an example, it costs an average of $1 million to construct 1 kilometer of carriageway. So from Bait Bridge To Harare, it's about 500 kilometers. Theoretically, it therefore should be 500 million US dollars, plus add-ons, the cost of man, $700 million. We have been paying our contractors the equivalent, although we say it's in local currency, of 3 million per kilometer is opposed to 1 million a kilometer. So part of the problem of de-dollarization is arbitrage, but arbitrage done in the form of the Zimbabwean dollar. And that's why we see these deficits every year that are then monetized by the government, then adopting. We now have had 2 debt assumptions bill of the Reserve Bank, but none of those debt assumptions have been audited. So we don't know as taxpayers what we are inheriting. It's a disaster. We are inheriting corruption, we are inheriting and assuming inefficiency, we are inheriting rent behavior, we are inheriting arbitrage. So we need to live within our means. We need to scrap export surrender requirements. Because when we scrap export surrender requirements, we increase the supply of foreign currency in the system. Therefore, this encourages and oils the free flotation of the exchange rate and the open availability of foreign currency on the market. Because you can't have your cake and eat it. So you can't have export surrender requirements and then pretend you have floated the Zim dollar. These are short-term things that we can do. We need to increase the tax burden on taxpayers in Zimbabwe. Because what we are doing is that our economy is very small, and this economy is prone to recessions. This economy loves recessions. If you look at the graph of this economy, it's permanently in depression mode from 1960 to now. And part of the reason is that we've had governments that go into people's economies, people's pockets, and leave people without disposable income. What drives economy, I believe in Keynesian economics, what drives the economy is spending. You can spend your way out of a crisis. But when you go into people's pockets and take away that market money, when you go into people's business balance sheets and take away that money, you've got a problem because you don't have expenditure. And that is our problem. So what this budget is doing is pro-recessionary, leading this economy into a depression. We should reduce the instance of taxation, the instance of interest, and allow people to have disposable incomes so that they can save. And savings, there's a banker there. How can we say we want to develop when we don't have savings? A country like China, the savings to GDP ratio in China is 50%, and it's now the world's second largest economy. A developing country like Zimbabwe needs savings that are at least 25% of GDP. We have none. It makes me so cross that I go to my bank, I shall mention which one, and I can't open a savings account. And each time my banker phones me, he says you don't have a balance because charges have eaten and malseated my balance. We can't develop, we haven't started. So part of the serious reform which we need is to return the savings account and to build a culture of savings in this country. So we can all do these things, they are important. But ultimately, the key issue is resolving the confidence issue, is resolving the political issue. I want to speak lastly on the currency issue. Instead of having this debate about dollarization or not dollarizing, the future of this economy lies in integration. If we were to integrate in SADC alone, that's a market of 300 million people. The real market of Zimbabwe, those who are in retail know, is less than 2 million people. Because 95% of our people are in the informal economy. So 2 million people can't sustain a serious business. So we need the 300 million people that are in SADC. That requires regional integration. Regional integration will require its own currency. It will be the rand by another name, just like the euro is the Deutsche Mark by another name, but who cares? Because business would have access to markets, we create employment, we leverage on our areas of specialization, we move on as a country. So the ultimate solution to the currency problem is not whether we are using the US dollar or the rand, it's economic integration. And whatever currency that economic bloc, the SADC bloc, will use, I think.
Okay. Thanks very much, Honorable Biti. A round of applause. Brains, I'm going to ask that you hold in a bit because persistence, I believe, is itching to take some of these possibly to the monetary policy. So he has a meeting shortly. So I'll ask him to come in, then you can have more time.
Yeah, but I need as well to give him advice before he leaves. Yeah.
Okay. So I think If you can just give him advice, then he can.
Oh, thank you very much. I like the fact that Percy is always sitting from another point. You know, every time he explains, he says from where I'm sitting. So many times he happens to be sitting somewhere where we don't even know. You see, yeah, another planet where they see things differently. And it should definitely not amaze you then when they come up with these strange things, you see, because the way they see things is totally different. Just before you go, Percy, the issue about the currency, remember I spoke about the presentation of the budget. Look, whether we like it or not, I think from an economic perspective, we all love the US dollar. But whether we like it or not, we're going to de-dollarize. We are going to go back to the Zim dollar, right? You are aware. I was talking to him just there that the rates of interest in the market, the bankers are charging 20%, 23% on US dollars, right? All in per annum. You can't charge that. That's cocaine-induced interest rates, right? Even in the US, the issuer of the currency, they don't charge such interest rates. In this country, the banking sector is printing a lot of fake US dollars. You know how money is created. So whether we like it or not, right, we are still going to get back to the Zimbabwe dollar, because eventually the whole system will collapse and we'll go back to the Zim dollar. When you go back to the Zim dollar, it will be for a few months and then we go back again to the US dollar. So my point to you, Pace, is that in the monetary policy where you are rushing to, you need to manage. You know, statutory reserves, they increased them recently. I've always been saying it for many years, that we can't allow statutory reserves on US dollars to be only 5%. Because the bankers, we allow the bankers in the microfinance sector to print a lot of these US dollars. Now your interest rates on US dollars around 23, 25% per annum. That's the average, right, in the banking sector. A bank will say they are lending to you at 18%, 3% commission, another 3% there, and another 2% there. So that is my advice to you as you go to the monetary policy. And of course as well, like I said earlier, you love the US dollar so much, like the Honorable said. Now, even when you look at the budget, all the charges are in US dollars. You then want to convert them to the Zim dollar at some other time, but they are in US dollars. If you love the US dollar so much, why don't you then present the budget in US dollars? If your love for the US dollar is so amazing, right? There's no reason why we should then love the US dollar, but you don't want as well to present it in US. So that is my advice to you, Percy, before you leave. But you can intervene.
No, thanks very much. I think Percy, you can, your last words before you take these key words to where you are going.
Thank you. Let me comment about the solution, current solution, centered around dollarization. In my view, dollarization is the easiest option, but the most dangerous. When you interjected to say we dollarized involuntarily, we, yes, involuntarily dollarized, but we should have left the Zimbabwean dollar limping. That's the point I was making. Dollarization is the easiest option because you can dollarize today and you have got a temporary relief. But Mr. Brain's thought process points to a scenario which is very unhealthy and characteristic of dollarization, unsustainable dollarization. There is no guarantee of permanent stability with dollarization. Dollarization gets you into a space of temporary relief, which you will soon get out of, involuntarily, like what we experience as a country. And this experience is similar across nations that dollarized. The biggest challenge with this warmth you get in dollarization is even between 2009 and 2013, the period that you so much hype. Our external balance was the worst up to now. 2.5 billion deficit, external deficit, is unsustainable. External deficit means contracting the economy, means that you are leaking, it's a leakage out of the circular flow of income. So dollarization effectively contracts the economy. Effect is long-term ramifications on the economy. Unsurprisingly, by 2013, this country was unable to sustain dollarization. No one knew. You can't see it. You may not feel it. But what was happening, the mechanics inside were pointing to an unsustainable situation. So if you so much love dollarization, be assured you dollarize and de-dollarize until you die. So the solution is to bite the bullet, despite challenges. We want painful but effective solutions to the country's problem. But when we bite the bullet, I hear you. The other issues, they also have to be attended to. The issues we've pointed to, the corruption and all other issues, the noise issues, they have to be attended to. So the policymaker should know that when the people have accepted to de-dollarize, everyone should play ball. Each and every one of us has to summon a new spirit if this thing is to work. So my recommendation is, yes, I hear you, but I don't recommend dollarization. Though, even to me, I see it as an easier option. Then, the question about floating the currency, I think it is ill-advised. Right, let me put things into perspective, which I always want to do. The construction of our economy is in such a way that, in terms of the sources of foreign currency, which you want to guarantee the functionality of the foreign exchange market, I have already given you the statistics relating to the makeup of those inflows. 60% from exports and 30% thereabouts from the remittances. But the exports is what is more interesting to me. And these exports, I've indicated, 85% of them, they traditionally come from the minerals. So last year, we did, I think, close to 7-point-something billion in terms of exports. And normally, 85% of those are minerals. And one company, platinum company, contributed 1.2 billion of those, which is about 20 thereabouts percent. So if you are contributing 1.2 billion at a time where surrender was 40%, it means that from the 40% surrender, you are able to generate about 500 million thereabouts, which you are converting into the local currency, and you are left with a balance of 700 or so million dollars. So one player in the economy who commands 20 or so percent of foreign currency has got all he needs, the Zimbabwean dollars and the US dollars. So where is the need for him to liquidate the balance? Right. So this is just a demonstration of the makeup of our economy, the unhealthy makeup of our economy. So if you remove the surrender, the tendency has always been, now we're talking about foreign currency challenges, but in the banks, they've always been between 1.4 billion to 2 billion sitting in the different FCA accounts. But we don't have access to that money. So only access we have to that money is through the surrender or the retention, which is then used through the auction system. That's the reason for the auction system. To get you access foreign currency for the essential needs of the country. If we don't have, imagine we don't have that market, that auction system, you may not be able to afford chemicals for water treatment. You may not be able to afford critical equipments, even the cancer screening equipment that we are so much concerned about.
But
we may not be able to
President,
afford that.
With respect, if we go back to what Brains was saying, if all the other things, if the government taxes and everything were in Zim dollars, isn't that a route that those who have exports would now have to actually sell to finance the Zim dollars? But where you have got all your taxes being paid in US dollars by the very same government, which is not demanding, Are we not killing ourselves?
You know, it's a process. It's a process. Just like you, just like we trying to come up with the de-dollarization roadmap. It cannot happen abruptly. We know that that's where you eventually want to go. But there are steps of getting there. It cannot be done abruptly.
Okay.
So life is all about balancing, and timing. So this is exactly what we are trying to do.
Okay.
We all want the government to underwrite the currency. But it cannot do that at the expense of everything. You don't want a situation you prematurely graduate into that position and left clutching at nothing as government in terms of what is required to keep the economy going. So we need to wrap our mind around the de-dollarization processes and the roadmap that we need to take as a country. That's the debate that I think is more important today.
Okay. Okay. You know, I mean, you can pass on my own view, actually, which is quite maybe radical on this whole dollarization, de-dollarization, is every time we've changed currencies, there have been serious casualties on most people. And there are few people who sit and make this decision, and the burden is carried by. My own view is it should be a subject of a referendum. It shouldn't be just 3 people who sit somewhere, wherever they are sitting, and make a decision which everybody else has got to carry. We've got pension funds. I think people who contributed real dollars for decades, and on one stroke of a pen, they are paupers today. You go back, even if you go back 3-4 years, we were looking at the banking sector, the assets have actually come down collectively by over 60-70%. And yet, all these players have no say on which currency they want. Who is pushing for this dollarization? Why should we not ask people what currency they want? Why should somebody sit and decide what another citizen should make? Especially if they have to carry the burden. So I just think we have monopolized this thing. It should be more people deciding what they want. And I don't, honestly, maybe it's naive, I don't care whether there's $1 or whatever. What is important is the exchange rate. Actually, when you walk into a shop every day, most people make a decision. They ask what rate is it, then they decide what currency to use. People are clever enough to do that. But we obsess about trying to tell people what currency. You look at Zambia, you look at all this, they open the exchange rate and people decide if you are stable. But if you wake up one morning, people run away because the bank rates are high, they put their money in some box somewhere, then you come after that box. How much confidence are we actually creating? So a lot of these issues, confidence is about trusting adults to make adult decisions and creating rules that allow things to flow. Even if you have water, well, how do you deal with water? You create a gradient. It flows. You don't beg it and start singing to it to go up. It flows where the currency is. And the last 10 years, we've been trying to convince water to flow upstream. It will not work.
Thank you. If you ask people what they want, they will choose the easier one, which is the dollar.
Why shouldn't people choose easy options?
But easier options are not necessarily the best. If you ask parents whether they want to take their children to school, they will choose to use the money otherwise. That's why sometimes...
No, that's not true, though.
No, sometimes. That's why the government... That's why it's the burden of government to provide social goods. Right? All countries that use their own currency is installed by some measure of law. All countries in this world, all countries in this world, if you ask them, even in Europe, you will not be shocked when they start pivoting for the dollar, for the US dollar. Because that's the nature of the US dollar. All over the world, That's what it does, the US dollar. It's very difficult. Once you have tested it, it's very difficult to leave it. So that's the nature of the dollar. So I hear you when you say people don't need to be force-merged into a currency regime. But there should be some measure of guidance into a currency regime. Yeah, there should be some measure of guidance into some currency regime. And also, if I am to be futuristic, Honorable Biti spoke about integration. So what this integration requires is for all currencies to have their own currencies. So what Afreximbank is doing, it is coming up with a Pan-Africa settlement system. So amongst our currencies within the international basket, we are now having to go through Afreximbank for clearance of our currencies. So which means that it's a precondition that Zimbabwe should, as we get to that level, have its own currency, which is able to stand alone. So we don't pull other countries out of this arrangement. Similarly, that's why it was difficult for Zimbabwe to be admitted in the Common Monetary Union. Because the risk was for Zimbabwe to pull other countries out of the union because of lack of economic convergence, and our currency was not that functional. Can I be allowed to be excused?
Yes.
Please,
I
thank
think
you.
That's fine. Thanks, Persistence, very much for standing firm. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. But I think as you go, one of the things that you need to just talk to where you're going is that it will be difficult for us to be accepted anyway if we don't even know what the size of our economy is. So let's maybe please go and just polish that aspect a bit. Thanks very much, Persistent. Ladies and gentlemen, I will ask our for 1 minute closing remarks from each of our panelists, and I think we will. Brains, did you have money? More two things. I think I'll start with you.
Look,
2 minutes.
Yeah, it has been so unfair. You see, I spoke first for 4 or 5 minutes. Honorable Biti spoke for 25 minutes, right? With these big words and all that, you couldn't stop him. Professor Mugano spoke for 35 minutes. The pastor was here for about an hour. You know how it is. Life is not fair. I think I'm just like one of those SMEs that are just being taxed to death. Look, I think my take from all this conversation is that there needs to be more consultation in terms of when you come up with things like the budget. When you look at the fact that this economy is more informal, I think surely if there was consultation with the informal sector, a better budget, I think better interventions would have come through. Even for the business sector, I think a professor spoke about interesting aspects that are going to affect even the formal economy, because they push their products through the informal sector, because the economy is informal, unfortunately. And I think I saw one tweet from one industrialist saying that, look, whatever is being proposed, it makes a lot of sense, but the only problem is that the very small informal sectors that will not be able to buy from the local producers will end up buying from South Africa. So eventually, these local manufacturers will be sitting with their products without buyers. Because when a buyer walks in, they are asking for tax clearance and so on, but when they go across the border, they'll just buy and bring them. The fact that there is a border doesn't mean anything. I think you all know about corruption in this country. Goods will just keep coming, they'll just keep coming, and with every layer of regulation, there is more corruption. So what will happen is that the guys at the border will make more money and make more money and make more money, and the goods will keep coming. So I think there is need for a broader consultation. Definitely we all need a better Zimbabwe, and I think from what I'm hearing, I think there are a lot of concessions that are going to come when the parliamentarians eventually debate the budget. The issue about the $100,000 tax, for example, $100,000 value or tax, whatever, what does it mean for the bankers that give mortgages, for example? So you're going to get a mortgage to buy a house that is $200,000. You're going to be paying almost similar amounts to Zimra and then to the bank for the mortgage. More more like, double, triple taxation. Eventually there would not be any incentive for the banking sector to finance property development, high-end property, and even the valuation of property. It's all subjective. If you build a house in a particular place and other people keep building in the same place, it eventually pulls up the price, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the cost of putting that house was more than 100,000. It could be 50,000, but eventually after 5 years, because others have put nicer houses, the values will go up. But so the taxation aspects, I think a lot will need to be fine-tuned in the budget, and I'm quite confident that we are a very consultative nation, and the parliament will be able to debate these issues, and eventually something that works for everyone will come. I'm so unhappy that our friend is no longer in parliament, so I don't know now who is going in parliament to assist others to understand this thing. But I think with all the prayers, I hope next time around you will win the election and get back in parliament.
Okay, Honorable Biti, you come maybe just also help us as you intervene to say, in the history of Parliament, has there been a budget that Parliament has refused before? How much power is actually, how does that system work? Maybe in a
No, the proposals, the tax proposals, come in the form of the finance bill. So MPs debate that at committee stage. And if you have people who know their way, you'll actually be able to resist a lot. So it depends now on what happens in the floor of the committee stage. And because it's a very technical issue, if you have researched the MPs, you can push back. One of the things that we pushed back, which I now see in this latest budget, was the desire to criminalize late payment of VAT and other taxes. So we fought it in 2023, but I see that he has brought it for the 2024 budget. The other thing which I didn't hear us discussing, which is absolutely unbelievable, is the attempt to take over by the government third-party insurance. Imagine the consequences on the insurance sector. It's like nationalizing all the insurance, short-term insurance that are dealing with third-party insurance. Third-party insurance is the bread and butter of all short-term players. That's clearly illegal. So I think, just to conclude, I think this has been a disastrous budget. I think you can't have a Minister of Finance who thinks that the solution to every problem is just to raise a tax or introduce a new one, particularly in an economy like this one. So consultation is key, and quite clearly it's not evident. The other thing that is disturbing, and it's the key distinction between Mutuli and the Honorable Chinamasa, the current minister has no respect to the law. So you see a lot of illegalities, blatant illegalities in his budget. One of them being, for instance, the fact that he's now going to collect toll fees when we have a road fund called Zinara. You would actually need to amend the Road Act for him to appropriate from Zinara. That you can't do that. So in conclusion, I think the elephant in the living room remains three things: our politics, lack of consultation, but in this case also just ordinary ability, just ordinary craft competence. It's lacking. Also lacking is just an ideology. What is the value system? Why should you try to tax my $100,000 house in Budiriro, yet Old Mutual, which owns all these buildings in Zimbabwe, are not being taxed? There's an ideological question there. So the budget is also ideologically vacuous.
Thanks very much, Honorable. And as I come to Prof, and maybe in your closing remarks, also just shed light in terms of, I think one of the things that have come up in the last couple of months was this bundling up of all these parastatals into Munuptapa Fund. And we know historically those used to control 40% of the GDP. Has there been any mention of that move in the budget in any way? How is that? Because you are shifting significant assets of the country, and I don't know what the implications are on anything. Meanwhile, we know that a big portion of the fiscal goes to finance these things. What is our take on that? Maybe you can just touch on that as you conclude as well.
No, thank you very much. So my major concern on the Mutapa Fund is that it's a sovereign wealth fund, ideally which must be funded by surpluses from trade surpluses. The Chinese one is funded by trade surplus. Then of course, Norwegian and the Botswana, the Polar Fund, funded by earnings from the minerals. So you are kind of creating savings for the future, budget surplus, if we had budget surplus, or profits or dividends from parastatals can also be part of the income for the sovereign wealth fund. Now, in our instance now, we broke new ground and history in the sense that we are also using our assets, 20 state-owned enterprises being part of the Mutapa Fund, right? Some of the assets in there, your NRZ, your ZESA, these are very, very big enterprises, notwithstanding their challenges in terms of performance, but they are bundled in there. And without any need to comply with procurement. So I'm more worried about corruption, because it means a lot of things are going to be happening. And also in terms of governance, the president is the one who is supposed to be appointing the board of the Mutapa Fund and the CEO and the chief investment officer. And the reports are supposed to be sent to the president, annual reports, and who is going to be questioning the president or to hold the president to account. So when you look at Botswana, our neighbor, the Minister of Finance appoints the board, and the board appoints the CEO. When an external audit is done, the Minister of Finance takes the audit to Parliament to present. So this report on how we are viewed globally by investors. So you don't have to be surprised when you see investments going to Botswana, Zambia, South Africa, and we are excluded because we are a lawless country. And I think Honorable Biti went to extra mile when he was also analyzing from a legal point of view in one of his interviews, where he recognized that this was a presidential powers which was used, where presidential powers must be used when there's a disaster like cyclone and you are saving the nation. So what was the cyclone which we went through, which saw the president enacting that Mutapa Fund? So the minister scribbled around it as mentioning how this is going to champion reforms, but it was not holding water. It's a disaster. We should not do things that way. But I want to end by saying this discussion was quite illuminating and enlightening. And I need to give a challenge to the organizers to say there are a number of takeaways which we discussed here, particularly I like my sister's question to say what was supposed to be the option for the SMEs. And this is a looming disaster because we're talking about 60 million people. We are talking about the businesses. By the nature of the product, it has to go through the informal sector. The newspapers, for example, the ice cream, the drinks which we take in the streets. So how are we going to move as a country? No notice whatsoever, not even 1 year to say, let's plan this process to restructure the way we are doing things. It's just a 1 month notice. And particularly, you see, people who are sitting here, this is the nature of government. Very adamant with intellectual ignorance to really defend up to death a nonsensical thing. So, arrogance. So, how are we going to live as a country? This is a challenge to say, when we go and face this government, and we know this is very dangerous, and they are the know-it-all, alpha and omega of everything. So how are we going to proceed with this disaster? This budget is a disaster. So I know you are going to have a report. Is there a mechanism that you are going to present it and then track it in the newspapers to say we made this presentation and we can meet after a quarter and say where are we? What are the symptoms now which are emerging? Do a main research to check with the companies how these measures are affecting and also people, and report it again to show that this is how we are going. Because if we leave it again, we are still going to suffer. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to our panelists. Brains, thank you so much, Honorable Biti and Prof. Mugano as usual. I think Batanai, the convener, will be able to put all this together with our teams and follow that through. And I don't know, Honorable Biti, in terms of the Parliamentary Committee on Budget and whatever, do they meet real people to get feedback on this? Or how can, in terms of processes, how can all these aspects be brought to their attention as they deliberate?
Yeah, traditionally, the Budget Committee is one of the sharpest committees of Parliament. So they will have the first go at critiquing the budget once second reading speeches are opened. So I would urge business and everyone who is here, you might not get the privilege of being invited to give oral evidence, but just do papers. They've got clerks that will actually read them and listen to them. So it's a very good committee. Traditionally, they will listen. And sometimes the minister actually also listens to some of their recommendations.
Thank you very much. I think on that note then, from our business associations and companies, one of the things I think that we suffer sometimes is we just suffer quietly without actually raising and putting our points across. So I think as we hear, we will certainly have a report which will forward through as a media house, but we also urge other citizens not to protest or anything, but to put their valid observations and points across. And on that note, Bana, thanks very much for giving us this opportunity. And gentlemen, thank you very much. I'll hand over to our program director of the day.